think about what is the area where you think your communication skill set can be improved and start there. And no, you don't need to boil the ocean when it comes to the way you show up in the world. Just take one sliver of what it is you do on a daily basis and see if you can strengthen that muscle first.
Welcome to Get Real, Get Results. I'm your host, Chantell Preston. I've got over 2 decades of experience in healthcare operations, project management, and consulting, and I've navigated the dance of career advancement and personal satisfaction firsthand. Get Real, Get Results is your go-to resource for navigating the complexities of a modern-day success without sacrificing your well-being. So buckle up and get ready to challenge the status quo, shatter limiting beliefs, and embark on a transformative journey toward a more authentic, balanced, and fulfilling life. This is Get Real, Get Results, and I'm honored to have you join me. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited. This is Chantell Preston with Get Real, Get Results. Super excited. I have a special guest today. I'm just going to frame it like this. Have you ever met one of those people that you're like, how did I get so lucky for this person to come in my life? And it was just the most coincidental, unusual meeting that you're like, wow, did that just happen? So my guest today, Jessica Abo, had the opportunity of meeting her at a conference. It's kind of an interesting story. We both showed up. I don't think either one of us really knew anybody, but the first person I met and started talking to was Jessica. And I have to tell you, from there on, it was probably the greatest 3 days of my life. It was like meeting my instant best friend. We went from barely knowing each other to diving really deep, really quick. So super excited. Jessica is an amazing award-winning journalist. I also didn't realize how famous she was when I first met her. Award-winning journalist. She is a best-selling author with a book called Unfiltered. She now does media training. She's a keynote speaker. She's an entrepreneur. She's all the things in life that I look up to. So I'm super excited to have Jessica part of Get Real, Get Results today. So Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. And I have to say, I have spoken about you in the exact same way and just have felt like, it's like life before Chantell, like, how did I even get by? So the feeling is so mutual. And thank you for all those very kind things.
It's so funny because Jessica came on and we both just start grinning. It's kind of like you're around these people and they bring such great energy to you. That's like, you can't help yourself. You're like, oh gosh, I can't wait till the next time we get to be together. So, but she's also just this absolutely amazing entrepreneur individual. And so I asked her to come on because so many things that she represents are the things that I've talked about on my podcast. Again, I look up to her as, oh my gosh, I'm just so inspired by the things that she's done, the journey she's taken. And frankly, I think everybody on the podcast thinks I just walk around, I'm confident all the time. And I'm like, oh, I know who I am. Oh my gosh, I had so much reflection of just my own personal self in those 3 days of really just sitting and talking and going down different paths with Jessica and asking each other these questions. It sounds bizarre and it sounds cheesy, but it was just such an inspirational reflection time in my life. So I couldn't wait for Jessica to come on board and we could talk through some things. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about, business and how can we improve ourselves. But I just wanted Jessica to come on board because I think so many things that her and I spoke about would be so invaluable to the folks that are listening to this podcast. So let's jump in, Jessica. Enough about how great we both are. But okay, so let's just jump in at this point, okay? So Jessica, as I mentioned, is an award-winning journalist, but some of the things that she taught me, which were so valuable, is she does this media training. And so Jessica, you really helped me figure out, I think the question I kept saying to myself is, why do people want to listen to me? Why is my story that great? I mean, I lived it. I'm like, yeah. People build companies, they sell them, we've all heard it before, but you really were able to articulate it in a way that I just never thought about it before. So, we all think our story is typical and normal, but talk to me a little bit about, the story and why do people want to hear other people's stories?
Well, I think the first reason why people want to hear other people's stories is because they want to know they're not alone. And then the second reason why they want to hear someone else's story is to glean some sort of hope, inspiration, lesson, solution, path forward from that other person. So for example, like when my husband and I were trying to have our second daughter, I gravitated toward people who talked about their journey on Instagram. And I always would go down the rabbit hole of people who it all worked out for them, to hear their story or to find out what they ate differently or what supplements they might have been taking. And I found so much comfort in that. So for all of those people who had gone through their own journey to have made the decision to go online or anywhere else and share what they had been through, help someone like me. So for someone like you to say, well, who would find this interesting, or why would someone want to hear my voice over someone else's? The answer is because no one else has your voice but you, and you are the solution to someone else's problem. You just might not know it. And by you taking the steps to put your story out there, you're going to be helping so many other people along the way.
That's a great point. You know, we take for granted that our trials and tribulations and that we're not alone. And I think that that's such a great point, because I think a lot of times we do feel like we're alone. And we talked about that in some of my other podcasts is, you know, it's lonely at the top. There's so many different things that, you know, we have in our minds that if we just knew that we weren't alone, it would make the journey so much easier. So let's take a step back. So let's talk about your journey. I mean, obviously I got the opportunity to hear a lot about it, but kind of give us a little bit of your journey of how you went from, you know, this award-winning journalist to entrepreneur to trainer to mom to all these things that you're juggling at one time. Talk through a little bit about your journey and how you got where you are.
Well, I never thought that this is where I would be. I never thought I would live in LA. I never thought that I would be out of TV news and I would be running my own company, let alone 2 different companies. So if you would have had this conversation with me when I was 9, when I had declared to anyone who would listen that I wanted to be a talk show host like Phil Donahue, I would have been like, oh, you have me confused with another Jessica. Like, that doesn't sound like my life at all. And I never thought I would leave New York. I grew up in Pennsylvania, but I'd spent a large portion of my career in New York City, and I never ever thought I would leave. So I guess the first thing I would say is that my story doesn't look anything like I thought it would. And it's turned out even better than I could have dreamed in a lot of areas. But the journey itself was not really that easy. So the journalism route is a lot like acting in that there are a lot of people who want to do it for not a lot of roles. And it's a very cutthroat, competitive business, and you sacrifice a lot of different parts about, I think, yourself and your personal life along the way in your younger years. And then you get older and you're like, wait, I don't need to sacrifice who I am as a person to please anyone or get the job or get the lead story. I can still be true to myself. So I was not someone who was willing to steal someone else's story or fight my way to the top. And being nice in this business is sort of a penalty. So I had a hard time, I think, finding my way because I didn't want to be covering the crime and the politics and the things that sort of keep us up at night. I wanted to be covering the good old-fashioned feel-good stories. And there wasn't Undercover Boss. There wasn't Extreme House Makeover. There wasn't a lot of these feel-good programs that exist today back then. So I never really felt like I fit in. And you also move around a lot in this business. So I worked in Burlington, Vermont, Lexington, Kentucky. I spent some time in Washington, D.C. I had gone to school at Northwestern for both my undergrad and graduate programs. So I'd spent time in Evanston and Chicago, and then 10 years in New York. So you're always starting over. You're always trying to make a community for yourself and really quickly so people like, know, and trust you and give you story ideas. And so that when there is news that breaks, you have those sources that you can turn to. So I think that that's been a really big part of the journey is thinking on my feet, connecting with people as quickly as I can in a really deep and meaningful way, and trying not to lose sight of who I am as a person to get to where I want to go.
Well, let's peel back that onion for a second. So you talked a couple things you said about sacrifices that you made along the way, and then, you know, jeopardizing who you are as a person. Is there some pivotal moments that you went through that you felt like the sacrifices were too much, and so you made a different decision? You know, I'd love to hear, you know, just some of the reasoning why you pivoted here or there. What were some of those pivotal moments?
There were 2 really big pivots, I would say. The first was when I was in Burlington, Vermont. I had a news director who was extraordinary, and every opportunity I could have dreamed of, he was wonderful and gave to me. I anchored a whole morning show on my own at 26 years old on, I think it was maybe it was Black Friday. So the main anchor had off. Maybe it was Thanksgiving, but the main anchor had off and he was like, Abo, you're up. And I remember going upstairs to the bathroom where we would all get ready to go on air and like jumping up and down, like squealing, like, oh my gosh, this opportunity is going to happen. But 2 years into that gig, I was really, really, really unhappy and miserable at that station. I dealt with a lot of really toxic people. And they made my life really difficult. And I just realized I don't love this anymore to not be at birthday parties and family holidays and family events. You know, being in Vermont, everyone I knew and loved was in New York and elsewhere. And I just thought to myself, there has to be a way out of here. So I applied for around 40 to 50 other TV news jobs. And I went to the UPS store on a daily basis with my VHS cassette and my latest version of my resume with a customized letter to whatever news director I was sending to whatever market. And, you know, the people at the post office would be like, okay, what market are we applying for a job today? While also going to Kaplan, I think it was called Kaplan at the time. I know that it's gone through a brand change, but to study for the LSATs, because I was like, okay, maybe if I apply to law school, I can take a few years off from TV news. I can get my law degree and then come back as, you know, someone who covers legal stories in more depth with this background. So I was waking up at around midnight, 1 a.m. to go to the morning shift. Oftentimes, because there wasn't a lot of staff to cover the stories that we covered, I would end up working the morning show, the noon news, and then sometimes turn over a story for the evening news. And then I would go, you know, eat dinner somewhere between like the parking lot of the newsroom and the parking lot of the LSATs. And I would just go to that. And I also applied to be a White House fellow. So I'm going through this like really rigorous White House fellowship application. I made it really far into the process, was one of the youngest people in the country to get as far as I did. And then I didn't make the final cut. So I did everything that I felt I could to get myself out of this situation and no doors open. And I just remember having lunch with my news director in my annual review and saying, I'm grateful for every opportunity, but I can't do it here anymore. And he said, I think you need to go to New York. Like, I think it's time. So I went to New York. And that was like big pivot number one, realizing like I had done everything I could humanly possible to make something different for myself. And the only thing that was left to do was really just to leave. So that was pivot number one. And pivot number two came after working in New York, covering all these different stories for about a decade. I had covered a few hurricanes. And on the last hurricane that I covered, we were 10 days into our coverage and we were waking up at 2 a.m. My crew and I on this given morning almost drove over a bunch of live wires, and I just couldn't cover the death and destruction anymore. And I just felt like it really got to me as a person of, I always wanted to help everyone and I wanted to do more. And I felt like on a daily basis, I wasn't doing the amount I wanted to do to help people, because you would be in their lives, you'd cover their story, and then you would leave and go on to the next story. So I started to realize then that I needed more out of my career and I needed more out of my life, and also didn't want to be working 20-hour days. And that was when I made pivot number two, which was working a bunch of different jobs so I could make enough money and I could leave the news business. And I did.
Wow. Wow. Well, and one of the things that I think I have an enormous amount of respect is you never wavered on your values. Like you said, you know, you're probably the nicest person I've ever met in my life. And sometimes I wonder, how did you survive in that industry? But you never wavered on that.
Barely.
Yeah. But you did. Okay. But, and when I met you, you're just very soft spoken, sweet as can be. And I'm like, wait, who is this person? And then you start peeling back the layers and you realize what a badass you are. And you start, you know, looking at your podcast, looking at some of your old stuff. I mean, you know, you never wavered on your values. How, being in such a toxic environment, how did you not waver on your values? I mean, how hard was that? You know, and I'm sitting here going, gosh, you know, I want to give you a big hug. How hard was that to leave what was your dream, basically, just because you realized it was such a toxic environment for you? I mean, talk about self-care for yourself. You know, how hard was that decision? And, you know, do you regret that decision?
So I always knew when I saw a news van drive by and I didn't like perk up and want to see who the reporter was inside or have a sense of what the story was that they were covering. I always knew when that feeling came, it was time for me to go. And once I got that feeling and I made the decision to do other things, I have not looked back once. And I don't regret it. I don't miss it for a minute. And I never have. So I think what ended up happening was I realized I could still help people in a really meaningful way. I could still stay connected to television by, when I came out here, when I met my husband, he was already in California. So I contributed to a few different outlets out here as someone who would come and be the guest and sit on the anchor desk with everybody else and go home. In other capacities, still doing stories from time to time on a freelance basis. And the more I did that, the more I realized I just don't love it enough to do it in any capacity that makes me have to wake up really late, or really early rather, or keep me away from my family really late. And if I was going to be up at 2 a.m, I wanted it to be because I had a baby who needed me. And that really ended up being the path that I followed. And now the amount of people that I can help, because I realized I didn't go back to finish how I got here. I was on a speaking tour for my book, which kept me still plugged into the newsroom, like in a really meaningful way. So I made it to the Today Show. I made it to Good Morning America. I made it to Access Hollywood and all these other places, but by way of being the guest. So I still felt very much in the game. And then when COVID hit, I had all these speeches lined up for the book and other things from LA to Japan. And like everybody else, everything that I'd worked for disappeared in a matter of days. And I had to figure out, like, what am I going to do to support my family and to keep my brain going and just keep adding purpose and passion into what I do. And everything sort of pointed me toward media training. I just didn't know at the time it was going to turn into courses and workbooks and masterminds and all these other things. I didn't realize it was going to get as big as it did. I thought I would do this thing, and then as soon as COVID was over, I would go back to what I was doing, which was the keynotes and creating content and doing other things. But this took a life of its own, and I'm so glad that it did.
Well, so let's go down that path, because you have so much knowledge to share with us. And I'm so excited because you've already taught me so many things. So talk more about that. I mean, like we started to go down the path, why does anybody care about my story? And you had a great answer as to, my story may be a solution to someone else or not being alone. So for those of us that have, the desire to really make an impact and to be heard, what are some of the strategies that we can utilize as a PR trainer? Of course, I'm trying not to lead you down these questions because I already know the answers because we've spent so much time together. Talk about some of the strategies that can be utilized by the listeners to get their voice out there, to feel that confident that other people want to hear their voice. So what can we do to really get our word out there?
Honestly, I think this just comes down to an exercise where you take out a piece of paper and a pen, or you take out your phone or your laptop, or like your journal, however this process works for you. And you just bullet point everything that you can think of from the day you were born up until today. And I think when you see that list, you remind yourself, like, whoa, like I forgot that I did that, or I forgot I overcame that, or I forgot that I navigated that problem and I got to the other side. Because we're always thinking, I always say, life is a marathon, and we are always at mile 13, where we need to celebrate how far we've come and also keep the eye on how far we have left to go. But we don't do a great job at mile 13 of looking back. We usually just look forward and say, okay, here's my strategy. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get water here. I'm going to slow down there. But what we did from 0 to 13, it's everything, because it's how we got to where we are in this moment. So I think if you just take a second and just acknowledge the good, the bad, the ugly that you've overcome, that you've embraced, that you've created, that you have nurtured and built, whatever it might be, you then start to see, like, okay, I actually have a lot to share. I've been through a lot. Or the addendum to that is go through your email, go through your phone, go through your own social media. And anytime anyone in your world, whether it was a customer, whether it was a client, whether it was a student, anytime someone has written you a nice message, a testimonial of sorts, you should have all of that in a file folder, that on those days where you're like, who would want to listen to me, or what do I have to offer? You start there and you're reminded of your impact and the gift that you bring to the world every single day. So either make that list for yourself or curate all of the nice things that people have said about you and spend some time in that content, really sitting in it and feeling those feelings of how you have changed someone else's life. And then think about, okay, what are the themes here? So am I someone who really falls into a mental health bucket? Do I fall into leadership? Do I fall into, when I think about the months over the course of a year, I think of September being back to school, and October being breast cancer awareness, and November being about giving back and Thanksgiving, and December is about the holidays. January is New Year, New You. Like, look at the calendar year and ask yourself, are there times during the year where the bucket that I am really passionate about has a time to shine? And chances are it does. And if you have no idea where to start, you can take your nuggets of information. And if it's like, I help people sleep better, well, then think about, maybe you want to be pitching yourself to the media around daylight savings when all of our sleep is messed up. Like there is a time and a place for every single person's story. And I happen to be someone who thinks you can be getting press 365 days of the year. So my first thing is just look at what you've done and add it all up. Compare it to all of the wonderful things that people have said about you and all of those moments where you were the person who kept someone going, and see if there's a common theme, and see if that theme has a moment during the year where people are really excited to talk about that topic. And that seems to be the way that it's a lot easier to take like our big, beautiful lives and boil them down into smaller steps to follow.
That's great advice. It's kind of fascinating, doing this podcast. Everybody's like, why are you doing it? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I hope it helps somebody, but the responses I've gotten have been significant. And sometimes, like you said, I never realized it would touch people in the way that it has. And, I just, being me, pretty authentic, I'm kind of an open book, sometimes good or bad, but you don't realize how it will impact people. And so Jessica had mentioned that to me, and I started doing the same thing about, okay, when I start getting imposter syndrome, because guys, I get imposter syndrome too sometimes, going back and really reading that and saying, hey, I think I am making a positive impact. And so I'm going to continue to move on with it. And, let's pivot a little bit because, not just about, newsworthy, but let's talk about, just being a leader as whole. One of the things that you do is media training, but also to leaders to how to be more effective to speaking with their staff, with their employees. And, talk a little bit, for those of us that are also leaders, how can we be more effective communicators to our staffs, to our employees, to the news? I mean, how can we be more effective leaders and communicate better?
I think it's incredible that we have sent people into outer space. And I think it's amazing that we are curing diseases. And if you look at where we are headed, everything we're doing is to advance humanity forward. And one area that makes me laugh, but it's really true when you think about it, the one area that we've gone backwards is we are living at a time when most people would rather communicate through emojis. And I'm pretty sure we left hieroglyphics quite a while ago, but we've actually gone back there. Like we would rather communicate through pictures than we would communicate with words. So when you keep that in mind as a leader, you have to remember you need to talk in a way that your people are going to listen. You need to talk in a way that shows your people that you care. You need to talk in a way that is breaking through the noise of the demands on every single person who comes through your doors on a daily basis or is working from home for you, with you on a daily basis. Because we've all been in that moment where we've told someone a 5-minute story and their head is buried in their phone. And then they look up and go, wait, what did you say? And it's like, wait, you were physically in front of me. I heard you, like it looked like you heard me talking. You were nodding your head, but you don't have a clue as to what I just communicated. So my whole thing here is just start simple, like communicate in a way that makes people want to stop, listen, pay attention, and feel like they are in the conversation with you. So I was recently with someone and I asked her what she did for a living. And she said, I elevate people's lives through fine jewelry. And I was like, I don't know what you do for a living. Like, do you come to my house and put the jewelry on? Do you go to your house and do you make the jewelry? And it turns out she has this awesome business, but that's not how she communicated herself to the world, because I feel like most people put into Chat GPT these days, like, what is the most complicated way for me to say the point I'm trying to make? Enter. Instead of just talking in a really crystal clear way that makes people want to listen, remember what they just heard, and then also want to act on it. So just reevaluate the way you're talking to your teams and make sure that you're talking to them in a way that is putting them first and also is very clear.
That's great advice. I'm thinking of that for my 13-year-old as well, that can't seem to have a conversation without looking at her phone too. I am worried about people's communication skills and what's going to happen as technology just continues to get better and better. And so, one of my goals is, how do I become a more effective listener Let me just say that too, because some of us, I mean, I can repeat back everything you said, doesn't mean I'm listening. We have that argument in my house all the time. Just because you can repeat what I said doesn't mean you're listening. But how do we become more effective communicators? And I think that that's so critical as we grow with whatever we want to do in life. Just having good relationships. I mean, I thought it was fascinating, and I hate to keep going back to when you and I met. It was interesting because neither one of us could care less about our phones. We were so engrossed in our conversations. We didn't even, I mean, it was like the rest of the world didn't matter. I mean, we were so engrossed of just hearing more. And I'm just going to say that's because you're a great communicator, that I was so into our conversation. And so I want people to realize how important that is in every aspect of our lives, not just as a leader, not just as, somebody on the news, but just in our personal relationships as a whole. And I think we've all taken that for granted. Technology is the greatest and the worst thing all at the same time. So how do we get back to that to make sure that we're living full lives?
100%. And two other things come to mind from when we met. I remember feeling like if they had shut down the dinner or if they had gone into another room, like I wouldn't have even known, because you and I were like so in the zone together. And at no point did you look over my shoulder. And at no point did I look over yours to see who was walking by. Was there a better conversation to be in? And the second thing to that was, you were one of the first people in a while who actually asked me questions. And we had friends over yesterday with their kids for a barbecue, and they had asked a couple questions about my job. And I said, I just have to acknowledge for a second how much I appreciate you actually asking about this project of mine. And I'm more than happy to tell you about it. But I just have found that as I get older in life, people don't ask questions. Not how are you? Not how have you been? Not how was that trip? Nothing. And it's so weird to me because I am someone who likes to go narrow and deep. I am a journalist at heart, so I like to ask questions and I'm curious. I get that not all people like to talk about themselves. I like that some people, don't know what question to ask or what's okay to ask or not okay to ask. But I also feel like we're missing moments of connection and communicating by simply asking simple questions and remembering what people have shared enough to ask the next time we see them, like, oh yeah, how was that graduation? Or, oh, how is your dad feeling? Like little things like that get people to listen too. And I think people forget about those small things because really they're actually the big ones.
That's interesting you say that. I have to say, if you would have met me probably 20 years ago, I may not have been that person because it was just so go. And I think I took a lot for granted of relationships, personal relationships, because I was like, oh yeah, everybody's busy. But I think as I've gotten older, I realized how important those relationships are. And at the end of the day, those relationships are what bring me so much joy versus checking my email, doing this. And so I've really had to practice and be cognizant of leaving my phone down or not checking my phone or not, and I've realized how much more joyful my life is of just being able to be in the zone with somebody and just, I want to learn everything I can and asking those open-ended questions. I think I had to start that with my kids because if you ask them, how was your day? Fine. Okay, great. Tell me about the best thing you enjoyed today. So it forces them to have more communication versus the yes, no, fine, good, all those great questions that they like to answer. And so I've really tried to be cognizant of that as I've, gotten older as to building those relationships with people. So that's fascinating. Thank you for recognizing that. I wish I was better with everybody as I was with you. I'm not sure everybody in my house will tell me I'm that great at that, but I'm working on it. And so let's go back. Sorry, we're really opening the onion here now. So let's go back to your company because you've built an amazing PR company. You're doing all this media training. And when I say media training, people are like, oh, well, I'm not in the media. It's really not just media training. It's just effective communication, basically, is how I see it. Because, I've learned so much from you and I'm not in the media. But it's effective communication as a whole. You're working with the healthcare sector, which is my realm, and I get how important that is. You're helping leaders. So talk a little bit more about your training and how you go about. And so if some of my listeners are interested in really honing some of those skills, where do they start? What's the best way to go about figuring that out?
Well, I think you can split this up into a few different pieces. So there are people out there who might be giving pitches to people for new business. There are other people who might need to give company-wide presentations on behalf of their team. Then there's the person who just simply gets really nervous to sit down with their boss for their annual review, or just feels like they don't have like a really cohesive team for the people that they're actually leading. And each of those people need a different sort of training to get to where they want to go. So for the person who's working on their pitch or giving that presentation, I often will ask them to do it for me so I can look at their slides, I can look at what they're saying and how they're saying it, and where do they sort of feel like they fall flat and lose the audience. And that's very different from when a boss comes up to you and says, where do we stand on that project? And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And then you start to like get really nervous and you sweat through your shirt and you over answer. And now like you're giving information that no one asked for, but you just don't know what that other person's looking for. So you don't know how to control the conversation. So I think the first thing to do is just think about whatever you do on a daily basis. And I joke that we communicate all day, every day, whether we're going on a date or we're picking up our kid from school or we're having lunch with a friend. Think about what is the area where you think your communication skill set can be improved and start there. And no, you don't need to boil the ocean when it comes to the way you show up in the world. Just take one sliver of what it is you do on a daily basis and see if you can strengthen that muscle first.
And so, okay, so go a little bit further on that. How do I strengthen that muscle? So if I've established, okay, this is my area of opportunity, what are some short, quick things? Because we all are already overscheduled and like, I don't have any more time to do it. But what are a few things that I can do to help me strengthen that muscle?
Go into every single situation in life knowing the answer to the question you hope no one ever asks you. So if you have an annual review with your boss, if you're going into a company-wide presentation, if you're meeting with an investor or a donor for your child's school, it doesn't matter. Make sure that the one thing you hope no one ever asks you, you have prepared an answer for. And if it's an answer that you need to have your legal team or someone just put eyes on, make sure that you have something that if it ever comes up, you already know you're prepared, because most people go into conversations thinking the other person's out to get them. Even if it's just like, I launched a banana bread company, people get so nervous because they're like, well, what if they throw me off guard? Well, the person who's bringing you in to do a cooking segment, like isn't looking to do an expose with you, but we get ourselves so riled up because our reputations matter. No one wants to mess up and look bad. So you can skyrocket your confidence if you just start with knowing how you'll respond to something that you don't want to talk about. And that's also true on a date too. And then the second thing is if you over answer, if you ramble and go on and on and on, wherever you need to take that big deep breath, put a period there instead. Because when you take that big deep breath, chances are you've already made your point and you can stop talking. And that's usually where people start to go, yeah, so it's like where all the filler words also start to come into everything because our brains are trying to catch up to where we are in the moment. But if instead you got to that moment and you put a period there, chances are you've made your point and you're good.
That is absolutely fascinating. I remember, I know so many salespeople that, once you've made the sale, walk away. And they just keep rambling on and almost lose the sale because they just don't know when to stop. And so that's a great, I'm going to work on the breath thing. I sometimes have some issues with it. Just keep going. So that's some great points. Well, so Jessica, tell us, how do people find you? So what can my listeners do? They say, hey, I want more of Jessica, which, I always want more of Jessica. So I want more of Jessica. So tell us a little bit about how they can follow you. Talk a little bit about your podcast, your book. So how can more people learn more great tips from you?
So we have a private podcast series that's just this limited run that you can go and you can download and listen to anytime. That's at jessicaabo.com. We also have free gifts and resources there that people can download to help them boost their executive presence, or if they are thinking about going into the media realm, little tips and tricks on how to get press and how to nail it when those opportunities come up. But I really think that at the end of the day, when you're preparing for a TV opportunity or you're preparing for a podcast, it actually reshapes the way you show up in every other conversation that you have. So I always say to people, even if this is something you never want to do it anyway, because you also don't know when the news is going to break and they're looking for someone like you, or your boss is on a plane or has the flu and they say, hey, by the way, Chantell, I need you to do this interview for me. Do you have a suit in the office? If so, put it on and go to this address. You're live at 5. You just don't know. So I like to be prepared for things in life. So I think if you go to my website, jessicaabo.com, that's a great place to start. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm at Jessica Abo TV and Jessica Abo on LinkedIn. And those are the places where I have the most content. And if you are in the healthcare space and you work with doctors or clinic owners or pharmaceutical companies, societies, et cetera, and you need some assistance in storytelling, you can go to JETT-productions.com, and everything I do is listed there.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Jessica, so much for meeting with us today. I can't wait for our next outing, which hopefully will be in a few weeks when I'm in LA. So thank you so much for joining us today. And we look forward to following your path and following your journey and watch all the wonderful things that you're going to do in the future.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and to your awesome team for working their magic to bring episodes like this to life. I know it takes a village. So thank you for all that you all do, and for having me, and just for being the special bright light that you are, because you are inspiring people on a daily basis, minute by minute. I am on that very long list, and we're all better because of you, Chantell. Like, that is really just the truth.
Oh my gosh, you're going to make me cry. I know. Okay. Well, thank you, Jessica. I appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Get Real, Get Results. Now get off your ass, get out there, and enjoy the life that you want to live. We're here if you need guidance. And until next time, do your best, enjoy the small victories, and stay unstoppable. And don't forget to visit chantellpreston.com for coaching or keynote booking information. And remember, you have to get real to get results.